I'm just going to invite folks into a little connecting practice, a little revisit or redux of what we started out yesterday. So with your eyes open or closed, I invite you to turn your attention inwards. And with your next breath, to extend your exhale. Just a little bit, not too much. A gentle breath in and a slightly longer exhale. And noticing, is there any shift in your state? A little more spaciousness, a little more softness. A slowing of your thoughts, a greater connection to your body. And with that, welcome. Okay, let's get in here. Okay. So I'm gonna spend a little time framing what I'm going to talk about and then sharing a little bit about the why of the Resilience Toolkit and where its role fits in trauma healing. And then I really enjoyed you all's energy when you were in some small group discussions. So we'll do a little bit of that and then we'll have some Q&A. So it's a tall order for 90 minutes. So we're all here, right, in this immersion to address trauma. Because I would guess that most of us know trauma is a root cause of suffering. Suffering inside us, suffering between us in our relationships, suffering in workplaces and in organizations and in the culture. But I would venture to guess for many, if not most people, this is an impossibility to name trauma. I remember many years ago, I was working on a trauma project in South Los Angeles, which for those that don't know, is an area that is marked by extreme deprivation, under-resourcing, community violence. And it was a community meeting, and a member of the community stood up and said, "Stop, enough. You with that trauma, shoving it down our throats." Now, I think we could all say there's probably a lot of economic trauma in this community, a lot of violent, right? And here is a member saying, enough, no. This should give us pause. We're all here and we're saying trauma is an issue. But there are most people, and I'm sure you also know this, right? Where you've tried to talk to people about trauma and you notice the glaze come over their face. I can see, right? A lot of nodding, right? And you're like, but only, can't you see this? And they can't. Why? Most people are actually living with trauma in the current moment. Most people are actually doing all they can just to survive. And if you have to name that your current circumstances are traumatic and admit it to yourself about how bad it is, what do you think happens? People fall apart. Who's going to pick them up? Where's the safety net that's going to pick them up? This is not delusionary, right? This is the facts of, for most people, it is a luxury to be able to name trauma. let alone to resource and heal. This is a problem. This is a real problem. And it was one that I was really wrestling with because I'm very interested in accessibility. How can we help people be able to name what it is so we can even then talk about the trauma healing, right? You can't talk about the healing if you can't say it's trauma, right? And even for those of you who are here where you're like, well, then that's not me, I'm here. I would venture to guess for most of us, there are some of our own experiences that are still a little too spicy, a little too intense for us to really name them yet, because we too may not be resourced enough. So to have some compassion that this is a shared experience about our inability to name trauma. So it was for this reason that I actually developed the resilience toolkit, and why I did not call it the trauma toolkit, right? Because guaranteed that's like no one's going to come. No one's going to, talk about it at that moment. You can't even start the conversation. The goal of the resilience toolkit is to help prepare people to step on the road for trauma healing. And for many of us, it's to help us step deeper onto this journey, right? It's through a process of resourcing, because I don't believe that it is willful, that someone's like choosing not to face their trauma. I think most people are doing the best they can. And so instead of judgment, you need to, you should, the trauma of should. Instead, can we take a view that what can we do to help you be able to do this, right? It's a much kinder, compassionate, not just for others, but also for ourselves. And I think that this is extra important. A lot of trauma healing approaches talks about trauma in the past, whether we're talking about assault, whether we're talking about an accident, whether we're talking about developmental trauma that happened in the context of our caregiving as children. But that's not the only trauma that exists. There is the trauma that is ongoing. For anybody here who has a marginalized identity, are you female? Are you disabled? Right? Are you an immigrant? Are you a person of color? Are you queer? Right? That with all of these and many more marginalized identities, the trauma of the interlocking systems of oppression, of racism, cis heteropatriarchy, late stage capitalism, all of these create traumatic circumstances. And I actually don't believe healing is the word when something is ongoing. It's a little spicy opinion. You can take it or not. The analogy I often give is that if my hand was cut, this is a wounding, no? And then it heals. What happens? The skin, my body stops the bleeding, the skin knits back together, and I heal. That makes sense. So if the trauma was in the past and I was cut and it's no longer happening, I'm healing. But what happens when the cut keeps happening and the knife keeps coming and it comes again and it comes again and it comes again? Is healing what's happening here? Is that even possible? I actually need to be free of the wounding. I need to be free of the wounding in order to heal. And so in this way, I believe that liberation and healing are sisters. And the resilience toolkit is about both. Right? So I can think if I want to reference myself, which I feel, that's a safe place to start. I grew up in a house with some pretty significant neglect, but that neglect happened in the context of patriarchy and sexism. It was not even across the household. So when I go and to do healing about that, if I can't talk about the patriarchy and the sexism that infused into my household about how love and resources were distributed, I can't really heal. It's both and. And that didn't just stop in my childhood, that replicated in school and workplaces, healing and liberation. Okay. So this is the why. And I think it's always important to understand why things are brought into existence because it helps us surface perhaps biases or impulses that may show up later. Lineage is very important. So the way that I shaped the toolkit was really, for those, and I believe Albert talked this morning a little bit about the stages of trauma healing. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Judith Herman's 3 stages. I know when I first stumbled upon that book, I was like, it was a validation because I was already seeing it. And I think many of us, just through an experiential lens, we see it, but it's so nice to have it named. And I find I don't just work with individuals, I do a lot of work with communities and organizations. And I find that 3 stages of healing happens not just in individuals, but at all levels collectively as well. And so I'm really, with the toolkit, we really focus on first stage, which is the resourcing and stabilization stage. I think through this immersion, you're going to get more of second and third stage, but I really want to focus on first stage here because that's really where I do the bulk of my work. So just as a little recap for those that aren't familiar, how do you know you're in the first stage? Or how can you recognize when somebody else is in a first stage of trauma healing? I like to say there's a lot of turbulence. Very nice way to say it, right? Chaos, crisis, intensity, overwhelm. The metaphor I often use is of drowning in rough seas. So if there's a lot of turbulence in the water and you're gasping, right? It's very rough. And I just want to highlight the point, the folly of asking people to swim deeper. If you saw somebody drowning, would you say, hey, could you swim deeper? I hope not, y'all. And we say that and we laugh about it, right? But what happens? When people are in crisis, what's one of the first things we say? Tell me your story. Am I correct? Right? And I'm not just talking about mental health clinicians, I'm just talking in the culture. You, as a good friend, tell me your story. This is akin to asking people to swim deeper when they're drowning. So we laugh about it, but we do it anyways. Because in the words of Tai Cheng, the trauma being an experience that is too much too fast or too little for too long, this is an experience of overwhelm. So when you go to tell the story without any additional resources, guess what's going to happen? Ta-da, you're overwhelmed again. No big surprise there, right? And I want to say it's not just on the way mental health services are often provided that are so story focused. It's not just in our culture when we think it's being supportive to like ask me and get the gory details like this. When we are trauma survivors, we also have an impulse for catharsis. Is it just me? Right, right. Like you have an impulse for catharsis, right? And it's actually, for me, one of the ways I know something was a little on the traumatic side is when I have the impulse to tell the story over and over and over again. As if with some kind of idea that if I just tell it enough, it will get out of my system. Like as if there's a quantity of trauma, right? 80 pounds of trauma. And if I tell it this many times, the 80 pounds is out there. We have this high charge that pushes us towards catharsis, towards intense experiences. So when that meets with a culture that's very story focused, we have a lot of people drowning, being told to swim deeper or voluntarily swimming deeper. Yeah. And some of this is so elementary, but it's still happening, y'all. Right? Like I don't feel, I mean, I see a lot of heads nodding that this is, are we complicit in it? Do we still do it? Does the culture support it? Absolutely. And it's not working. Because when you're drowning, what you need is to be thrown a lifeline. You need to be helped to shore, get that water out of your lungs, cough and sputter. Right? That's what we need. And then we need to learn how to swim before hurling ourselves into turbulent, stormy water. And usually when you learn how to swim, you learn how to swim in the shallow end. And you, as your skills get stronger, you go deeper and deeper until you're like, okay, I'm ready to cross the English Channel. Yeah. So what do we need? What is the lifeline here? It's calm, it's safety, it's comfort, it's to stabilize and to get to shore. But remember, we often have high charge in us, and this feels boring. Come on, let's get to it. Right? So if we know that these are the needs of the first stage when somebody is in it, right? And that in it, I want to say, is not just from past issues, it can also be current issues. And I'm going to show how we deal with both. Because I get a lot of questions is like, well, it's not in the past. This is still going on. How do I deal with this now? And I think this is a really important question because for most of us, at some point or another, that will be the case. So how does the toolkit, the resilience toolkit, meet these needs of calm and safety and comfort and connection, of stabilization? By developing internal resources, and I'm just gonna list them and then I'm gonna get into it a bit. The internal resources of self-knowing, self-meeting, the ability to meet yourself, self-regulation, self-agency, and self-advocacy. These are internal resources. Okay? But they are not, you heard all of those self. I want to say this is not in a hyper individualistic vacuum. The understanding, what is also needed as a resource is understanding ourself in our ecology, in the relationships with other individuals, with the collective, with the more than human, with the culture, with the historical, with the systemic. So in the toolkit, there is a pushback against the individualization and pathologization of adaptive responses to harmful circumstances. And this is, we're going to get into it. I'm just giving you a little taste and then we'll dive into it a little bit more. And the toolkit isn't just about developing internal resources, it's also helping us develop the embodied capacities to reach for and receive. Those are two different things, reach for and receive external resources throughout the trauma healing journey. That usually happens a little further in, but it sets us up to have the sufficient internal resources to tolerate the vulnerability of interdependence, to confront narratives of unworthiness. I am not worthy to receive resources. To be able to tolerate this without collapsing or acting out or acting in. So that's the big theory, and I want to make this really practical. I love theory. I'm kind of a nerd that way, but I'm also really practical. All kinds of opposites exist here. We use a series of very simple guiding questions, and I'm going to list each of the guiding questions and show how it works and what capacities it develops. And so these are guiding questions that we ask ourselves. And the first question is so simple. What is my state? It's the first guiding question. What is my state? So clearly we're touching on self-knowing here. And in the toolkit, we use a number of different models. Y'all know polyvagal? Yes, lots of folks know polyvagal. So that's one model. But there are many other models to understand trauma and how stress or toxic stress and trauma show up in our bodies and our experiences. And I want to be very clear that a model or a framework, it's like a map. So if I open my phone and open up Google Maps or Apple Maps, what does it do? It helps me know where I am and it helps me navigate, right? But am I going to confuse what's on my phone with the actual landscape around me? No. A map is not reality. A map helps us understand where we are and helps us navigate. And I think we make this mistake where we take the model and we think it's reality. So a good model helps us understand ourselves and our experience and helps us navigate. And polyvagal, because I can see for a lot of people, that's given a lot of people. Do you remember when you first heard fight, flight, and freeze and you're like, oh my goodness, right? You had that moment of understanding and then it helped you navigate about how you were going to move. That's a good model, but it's not actually life. It's a model. And there are other models, and no model is perfect. They all have gaps. They all have strengths. So in the toolkit, we use different models to help folks understand. So I will see, for example, when we think about fight flight in the polyvagal model, and we think about the expression of I'm going to fight or I'm going to flee. And sometimes I'll present this to folks. So I'm going to just use an example from my own family. I have two adult sons. They are Black men. So what happens if one of my sons is driving and gets pulled over by law enforcement and it's unfair and he feels really upset and super stressed and wants to fight? What do you think would happen in the United States? Probably a shooting. Yeah. But what if he just wanted to run away? Also a shooting. Okay. So for some people, when you, in a situation when you have less power, you actually are not able to express freely the fight flight. The greater privilege you have, the more easily it is acceptable and safe for you to express fight flight. If you have less privilege, no. So does that model going to work for everybody? Do you see that there's a problem? So what model would I bring in? In the toolkit, we bring in the model of appeasement, which is both a cultural and a biological response to power differential. And so my sons might start joking or laughing with the officers. Do you think they feel like joking or laughing? Probably not. They're scared, right? They want to fight, they want to run, but they freeze it in place. That is a model that would help them understand what is their state. Because afterwards, when they come and they're shaking and they're feeling really upset and they want to know what just happened, to help them understand from this crisis that they're feeling, the turbulence, if I can give an explanation of appeasement, there's a, that's what happened. Okay. So it's really important that we're flexible and draw from different models to help people understand, so that that moment, if polyvagal did that for you, we want that moment for everybody to understand what is my state. And this came to me because as I was practicing, because I used to use just polyvagal, and people will say, well, I'm not really this or that. And I started to listen. If people keep saying, I'm not really this or that, then what are you? Like, I need to look and go into the research and see what else is there. So with that, we move to the second question. And the second question is, how do I know? The second guiding question for the toolkit is, how do I know? How do I know that my state is X or Y, A or B? So what we're doing here is also developing self-knowing. And I would say in a culture, mainstream Western dominant culture is so cognitively focused that people do not spend much time or discount the messages from our bodies. Maybe our emotions a little bit, but from our bodies, no. And then it's not just that the focus is so cognitive, it's that we are all in a rush. That's also a symptom in our culture, right? Everything is quick, quick, quick. There's not time for reflection, for connection. And so what I see is people have a poverty of not just understanding their somatic cues, but the language to translate them. Really, truly, this is a poverty. Like, we just don't have, most people don't have language for what's happening in their body. And so we're both developing the interoceptive capacities to know what's happening, to understand myself, but we're also developing language for this. And I find it so beautiful in some of the communities that I facilitate to see a collective language develop. As people are able to enter the realm of the sensory or the metaphor, I feel like my body feels like it's in a pressurized cave. It's dark, right? Or I feel like I'm on a wide vista looking across green rolling hills, my body, right? When you see, like, I always love when there's a poet in the group and you start to see the group develop this language to understand, this is how I know where I am. This is where people make a model their own. Even if we're saying polyvagal, if we say social engagement system, that's on paper, but how do I know for me? Not just in my body and my emotions and my mind, but how am I relationally with other people? I find that I sit back in my chair. I find my curiosity blooms. smile easily across my face? What is it, right, that we can describe this? And so the process of just asking these two questions, what is my state and how do I know, really help people develop what is known as meta-awareness. So meta-awareness is the ability to observe yourself. And we know from ample literature that this is a known resilience determinant. The capacity to both be in an experience and observe myself in the experience. So just those two questions help develop this. The language, the interoceptive capacities, the meta-awareness. The third question I find very intriguing is my state useful for me in this moment? See, these, again, they're very simple on their surface, but we're just going in to see what happens underneath. Is my state useful for me in this moment? This is about self-meeting, meeting yourself. And here's where I had said that mouthful about pushing back against the individualization or the pathologization of adaptive responses to harmful circumstances. Here, I want to break that down. If I can go back to the example of my sons and a law enforcement. Or I could use an example. I remember teaching to a group of youth activists who used art and poetry with kids impacted by violence. And there was a young man who was a former gang member who had been incarcerated and was now out and was doing all this great peace building, community building artwork. And we started to talk about these models. And when I talked about appeasement, he shared being pulled over for no real reason by a law enforcement and how he was, yes, sir, no, sir, but like really subservient and made himself small. He's a big guy, right? And how he said, what's wrong with me? Why didn't I stand up? There was no, I had nothing, he didn't find anything. There was nothing, I was doing nothing wrong. And what he completely collapsed in that moment. And he was so down on himself. And so for him to understand through the model and then ask this question, was this state useful for me in this moment? His answer was, it actually was, because it helped him get home safely to his 2-year-old son. So if we just, because there's sort of a glorification of social engagement, there's a glorification of being always calm. And I want to say being always calm is not the best thing. Like if this, this man actually needed to be in a very collapsed, subservient, highly stressed, alert, but like held in place. That if we moved this man to another situation, like with his 2-year-old, we would say, this is the problem. That's not how you should be as a parent. Like that's not going to be great for connecting. But in this situation, it was adaptive. And I think this is really important because so many of us walk through the world navigating some real tough stuff. And how then we'll be down on ourselves where I should be more regulated. I should be more regulated. As if we are should be completely regulated with, hurtling towards climate collapse and how many wars and genocides happening at the same time. You're all human. And so the wellness industry, right, has like sort of lifted up that we should all be calm all the time in a real, like, what's wrong with you? But it's a way to blame us and for the systems that are making things so hard, so dangerous, to shirk the responsibility of creating these conditions that we live in. And so this question pushes on all of those things so that we can look at ourselves and say, you know what? This response is really needed right now, and this is a really crappy situation. And instead of being down on myself like this young man was, I can have compassion for myself that I did what I needed to do to survive. And that's really important, that shift. Okay. At the same time, sometimes we are in an over response. We are doing more than is necessary in that moment. So we're appeasing more than we need. I think of an example. Someone came to me and said, I really want to develop more resilience and to be better regulated. And I said, what's going on? And she told the story that in her workplace, this was a very petite Asian engineer in a military aeronautical, like very male dominated field. And her boss was really abusive, like throwing things. And she says, I need to be calmer. Y'all, this is what happens when we have this narrative that people need to be regulated all the time. And I'm thinking inside, like, that's not really what needs to happen here. But, how do we, you can't should people have to come to stuff on their own. What we were able to say is to say, is your state, so she would be like just super hyper vigilant and on high alert about, as soon as she got to work. And she realized, you know what, I need to be like that, like actually to protect myself. But what she realized is when she came home, she was still hyper vigilant. And so when she could ask herself that question at night, at home, the answer is actually, this isn't so useful. Do you see what's happening there? So she's in, abusive situation, having a trauma response in the moment that has helped keep her safe, but she's carrying it 24/7. So her ability to ask this question and realize, no, it's not so useful, is a game changer in many different ways. Okay. Because and this is what I'm connecting to here is we're not talking about something that happened in the past. We're talking about something that she's existing in right now. And so that may be something that resonates for you, something I'm going through right now, or some of your clients, if you work with people, what are they going through right now? That it's not just in the past. It's rarely is it 24/7. There are usually some ebbing and flowing. And so the ability to spot moments of relative safety is super important. And this question helps you do that. Is my state useful for me in this moment? And it helps me recognize myself in ecology. Okay. So then this brings to the next question, the next guiding question. If this is not useful right now, what practice can I do? And so you might realize that the state you're in is not useful in the type, because you don't need to be hypervigilant when you live alone and you're at home. Or it might be the intensity, right? So this person realized that even at work that she was like on 7,000 when 1,000 would do. So she was carrying it too much at work and for too long at home. And just by asking these questions, this became clear to her. So what practice can I do now? And so when I developed the toolkit, I was working in very sort of extreme situations with gang intervention workers who live in communities of violence. So where they're not going on a retreat. Like, where are you going to go? It's actually everywhere around you. Working with first responders. What are you going to do? Say, you just breathe there yourself. You stop your own bleeding. I'm going to go and do some breathing over here. And so these are the kinds of conditions with where I developed the toolkit in real time. So I'm very interested in real-time practices that people can use in about 30 seconds or less. Okay. So we use a number of practices. I did a very short, that little breathing practice we did at the beginning here when I first stepped on the stage. We call that settling breath, where we take advantage when when we breathe out, our heart rate slows slightly. When you breathe in, your heart rate speeds slightly. And so having a slightly longer exhale is going to give you a slight calming as opposed to a square breathing where it's even all the way around. You know, there's some movement practices. Right? I'll be doing tomorrow and the next day a therapeutic tremor practice. That's also very short. So I hope you'll join me in doing those practices. And the rule of thumb in the toolkit is if it doesn't help in 30 seconds, stop and do the next. What? I don't know about you, but I remember when I was like, okay, I'm going to try meditation, right? And I tried to sit and I said, my God, this is the worst thing ever. How does anybody do this? This is horrible. My monkey mind. I have like all this stuff coming up. And I was trying to do insight meditation. And my narrative was, what's wrong with me? Something's wrong with me because meditation is good. So something must be wrong with me. Yeah. Am I alone or does someone else have this experience? I see some hands. Yeah. Um, Nothing's wrong with me and nothing's wrong with meditation. Wrong tool for the job. That's all. And so many people will try, it doesn't work. And they're like, I feel terrible. And they're like, well, keep going. Right. And you know, meditation comes from Buddhism. Buddhism's a religion. And leave it to us crafty Americans to take a religion and turn it into a tool where we make it's all about consumerism, it's all about productivity, it's to make you a better producer, a better consumer, right? Stress reduction is not the purpose of religion. And in Buddhism, what do we have? Yes, you turn inwards towards yourself, but is it through an app? What do you have? You have sacred texts, you have teachers, you have Sangha, you have community. And we, again, leave it to crafty Americans. We just distill it into an app and think people are going to be okay. So I have a very dear friend who's a Buddhist teacher, and she often teaches long retreats, and people come and they fall apart. We're not trying to do that kind of mindfulness. We are looking for short, quick practices. Okay? Because we're going to ask the next guiding question, how do I know it worked? And this is the piece that's missing. How do I know it worked? A lot of things happen when we ask this question. It's a very deceptively simple practice, just these little questions, but a lot of things happen when we ask. One, it helps us acknowledge that it's not one size fits all. It helps us turn inwards and notice shifts. So if my system is settling and there's signs of down regulation, like a yawn or softening muscles or deepening breath, if I focus on it, it potentiates the effect. Win-win. If I turn inwards and I notice that my stress is actually climbing, okay, what happens? The encouragement is to stop and do something different. So how does this change some narratives? A lot of trauma is about being in situations where we cannot be in control. We're not in control. We're being overwhelmed. Our choices are not honored. So what happens in that very simple moment when you say, this isn't working for me, I'd like to stop? is actually sometimes the biggest healing that happens. It's not the regulation, it's the, this doesn't work. I know it doesn't work for me and I'd like to stop. And to be encouraged and cheerlead that that is a good thing. Because so many of us will push and push ourselves when we don't need to, because we are so habituated to be about everybody else's comfort. We don't even know what we need. So the self-knowing here really grows, right? It's less important, does it regulate? It's more important just to recognize the changes and then to act from it. Oh, this is working, I'm going to keep going. This is not working, I'm going to change. One, that process grows what's called regulatory flexibility, also a known resilience determinant. The ability to, it's like the sunk cost fallacy. It's not working, but I've already invested so much, so I'm going to keep investing more. No, it doesn't work. Stop, shift, and do something different. This is a sign of flexibility, regulatory flexibility, again, in the micro. What else happens here when you do this? This is the growing, right? Not just of self-knowing, but of self-agency. I can choose what is in my best self-interest, which for many people, this is revolutionary. Especially if you have a marginalized identity. I can say as a Black person, a Black woman in this culture, that I was acculturated to be about the comfort and safety of everyone else around me. And in fact, that's how I stayed safe, is to make sure everyone else with more power was comfortable and safe. And I see a lot of heads nodding. Women are acculturated. Keep the men safe, keep them calm, whatever you need to do, and pretzel you need to turn yourself into so that, right? Yes, yes, right? So this becomes through so much practice from when we are this big, that when you start to say, I'm uncomfortable, can I stop? It's a big deal, y'all. We're going against culture. Again, it's such a simple question. We're going against culture, and we often need to start in the micro, in the small. So I can start to move to advocate, this doesn't work for me. So I remember working with another group of youth. Again, I've worked in all different kinds of situations, but somehow these examples are coming to mind. And we were doing one practice, and this kid said, he said, I don't like this. And I could see him looking at me like, because do we allow children to say no? Come on, y'all. And I said, I'm so happy you know what you like and don't like. Don't do it. And he was like, what just happened here? And then we did another practice, and then he was like, I'm going to do it, because now he was doing it for himself. He knew he wasn't, right? Okay. There's that little bit of permission. And we did the therapeutic tremor, and I could hear very soon he was snoring. And afterwards, there was a dozen youth. Most of them had been incarcerated, had been shot. I mean, just really rough, rough lives. And this boy, as we went around and people shared what their experience was, he said, I fell asleep. And he goes, and y'all, I don't sleep. So this kid, he's like, I sleep maybe a couple hours a night. I don't sleep. And he said, I fell asleep and I dreamt I was in the mountains and there were stars and trees. He had never been to the mountains. So that little bit of spaciousness to be able to say, no, this doesn't serve me, and to have that permission, what is needed and what happens, the healing in that over and over again. It's small, but not small. And so what happens is it's a cycle of repetition, of asking yourself these questions. What is my state? How do I know? Is my state useful for me right now? If it's not, what practice can I do? Did it work? If it didn't work, what can I switch to? Simple, right? But look at all the skills that develop: self-knowing, interoceptive capacities, and language. I meet myself. I'm able to discern my needs, and I'm able to act on them. And so what we see as this is repeated over and over again is people grow their confidence in their knowledge and skills to regulate, to identify, to find safety. There's more spaciousness. We're not wasting energy in over responses that are not useful, which gives us a chance to conserve energy for focused healing and the narrative work or the sensation-based exploration, let's say, of a somatic experiencing, that happens more in the second stage. And so what we're doing here is growing resilience. And the kind of resilience we're interested in growing is not the be tougher, stronger, more flexible so you can take and endure more crap. We're not interested in that kind of resilience. We're interested in what I like to call alchemical resilience, like alchemy, right? Alchemy, where you turn a base metal into gold, where your result is bigger than the ingredients you put in. The way I define alchemical resilience is we are interested in growing this type of resilience, alchemical resilience, which is the flexible strength and increased capacity to heal, to overcome adversity, and to have that bandwidth to change the systems of inequity and oppression into places where we thrive. Because it's not, this is how we prepare for this healing journey, but it's not just a healing journey. Remember, we need to be free of the wounding. And as we start to practice this, we start to build reserves and capacities and strengths for the liberation as well. So I like to think this is how we get free together. All right, y'all. So I said a lot of things. I'm apt to, I think maybe I want to do some small group. I have some questions for you, or individual reflection if you're more in the mood for that, or you're at home watching the live stream. But I also want to have time, like, for some real time for questions and answers to make this really practical. So I actually think let's do a few questions first before we go into small groups, then we'll go into small groups and we can do some more. Yeah? Okay. So we've got mics on both sides. If folks, I'm going to take, let's say, 4 questions, then we'll do some small group and we'll come back and do some more questions. Okay. So I think everyone, we've got, why don't you go ahead? We'll take you and then we'll go over here.
Hi, sure. So my question is with regards to all the self pieces, how can you, or what would you offer someone who is in the ongoing wounding with, for whatever circumstantial reasons, no light at the end of the tunnel yet? How can they develop that on a very deep internal level while still constantly being poked at?
So the thing here is to recognize, just like that example I gave of the woman who was in that workplace, she was being poked at constantly in a very horrible way, but it wasn't 24/7. And so I'm going to finish that example and let's see if this answers for you. Is what happened is that as she would practice the toolkit when she got home, she would settle and she slept better. So she was less tired. she was in such a high state that she was isolating. She wasn't talking to anybody at work. She thought it was her burden to bear alone. As she, right, also recognized that she was on 7,000 when 1,000 would do at work, with all the poking going on, she was able to come down a little bit. So she started to, instead of this little view, she started to see a wider perspective. She realized this is happening to everyone else at work too. So she started talking to people. And guess what? She wasn't feeling so alone, right? Which then sort of gave her a little more spaciousness. So then a few people went and made a complaint to human resources, feeling a little bit more spacious, right? She's still being poked at, right? But she's finding the wiggle room by settling when she's away from the poke and not over responding to the poke, which is opening up capacity and energy for creative problem solving. And let me tell you, I could not make this up. Within 6 months, it was a big company. She recognized, she's like, why am I staying here? Let me apply to work in another division. And she did and got a promotion. And she slowly hired everybody from her former team away from that boss. Does that help?
Very much. Thank you.
Okay. All right, we'll take a question here.
Hi. Okay, so I'm going to try to make this as concise of a question as possible. How do you approach healing you talked about underserved communities, and that's something I work with a lot of people who don't even know that they need to heal, or that healing is an option, or that they have trauma. And, it's really hard to broach that because they don't even believe in it. How do you get these people to come?
So, a big part of being trauma informed is choice and autonomy, right? And so if I am determining what someone else's healing path, that's not trauma informed. If I'm telling them what their experience is, it's not trauma informed, which you're struggling with, right? So I think the way that I've approached it is, I don't think anyone doesn't want to name what's happening. I think they can't. And so when you can build more resources and more spaciousness through, that's the way I use the toolkit, they start to have instead of this very myopic view, they start to see things more broadly. So I'll give another example from this is a school for pregnant and parenting teenagers. A lot of very severe trauma. And so we did a I don't know, it was 8 weeks, 12 weeks, I forget, it was some years ago, program. And at the beginning, it was really like, where am I getting diapers? Where am I sleeping tonight? Really basic stuff. So we're not talking about the interpersonal, intimate partner violence, the child abuse, the drug. We're not talking about any of it. It's just so concrete. But what we started to see about midway through, right? One of the girls, her family had a dog, and the dog wasn't doing well. And I'm like, oh God, this is going to be bad. And so one of the questions we would ask is, how was your stress this week? I didn't use the word trauma. How was your stress this week? Even though this is trauma. I said, and they would say, ask the question, the guiding question, did it match? Did it match the situation? And she's like, oh, I was pretty stressed. And the question is, did it match about her dog being sick? They didn't have money to go to the vet or anything like this. And she goes, you know what? I think I was over responding. And I was really surprised. But this is from her to be able to say this. So she's like, I think in the future, next time I would try this. Right? So this is a few weeks in. And then another girl who, she's living in a hotel with a 1-year-old, and she's like, I'm really stressed that the baby's going to cry and I'm going to be kicked out. And she goes, I was really in a freeze. And the question is, was that a, useful response? And she's like, yeah, that's where I needed to be. And all the other girls were like, yep, we know. So in that way, they're able to relate it to their lives. But the capacity to start seeing bigger starts to happen. By the end of this period, girls were filing restraining orders against their partners. Their test scores went up, and they started wanting to talk about why there was no job training in their community. From them, that wasn't from me. So start where they are, grow some skills, build some bandwidth, because you're asking someone to name trauma while they're drowning. Of course, they're not want to talk about it with you. Get them to shore.
Thank you. That's
Thank
very
you.
helpful.
You're welcome. All right, we'll do one here.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge. I too live in LA and work in South Central, Watts, Compton, East LA, doing the same work. And one of the things that I found is I do talk about trauma with them. I talk about the truth, right? The truth about how the system has been part of the trauma. And one of the definitions that I utilize for trauma is by Dr. DeGroy, post-traumatic slave syndrome. I'm sure you know the book. And I wanted to share it and then ask you a question. So just, you know, we know Gabor Mates and Levine's, but Dr. DeGroy wrote, from post-traumatic slave syndrome, trauma is an injury caused by an outside, usually violent force, event, or experience. We can experience this injury physically, emotionally, psychologically, and or spiritually. Trauma can upset our equilibrium and sense of well-being. If a trauma is severe enough, it can distort our attitudes and beliefs. Such distortions often result in dysfunctional behaviors, which can in turn produce unwanted consequences. If one traumatic experience can result in distorted attitudes, dysfunctional behaviors, and unwanted consequences, this pattern is magnified exponentially when a person repeatedly experiences severe trauma, and it is much worse when the traumas are caused by human beings. Now, with
Thank
that
you.
being, you're welcome, but thank DeGroy, right? Our
Dr.
elders
Joy DeGroy.
dropping bombs.
Mhm.
What I feel, and from my own experiences, obviously going through my own traumas, incarceration, drug selling, et cetera, and being able to heal for that, one of the main things that I've discovered and what I share with the young people, for me, the light was reading Malcolm X and the autobiography of him. It was context. You get context to understanding how oppressive the system is. And so with that being said, some of the things that I have done with young people is running through the methodology of decolonizing the mind, right? We can understand our systems of what happened at home, but you know, for myself, I grew up in Santa Barbara. In my neighborhood, there was a street called Indio Muerto Street. And those that speak Spanish, it means Dead Indian Street. So for most of my life growing up with this unconscious symbol until I became conscious of it, right, was my awakening. So what I found, and well, not even what I found, I want to ask you, how significant is it for young Black and brown youth and adults to understand the context of history and the liberation of themselves, to heal themselves from this system, which we call capitalism, neoliberalism, right? And how it has affected our ancestors in the present. And I'll leave it with that.
Thank you very much for your comments and question. You know, I followed that path actually. As a young person, I was an activist and organizer first. I studied, my first teacher was Angela Davis. I studied with her for several years directly. So this is where I cut my teeth. I think this is a lot of both and, right? I think the pendulum can swing on both sides and be problematic. So there can be a over focus on the small, intimate, interpersonal, so much so that we lose sight of the systems and the water we all swim in and how they impact all of us, whether you're privileged or disadvantaged or multiple. At the same time, you can over focus on the big and the large, right? And the systems, and ignore the human and the inter and the delicate. It's both and. So that's, yeah, because it's, you know, decolonizing the mind, but also the body, right? We've got to decolonize the body, and how much of the culture is in how we sit, how we, you know, how much of it shows up inside of us. So it's both and, you know, there are many ways to reach folks. I encourage all of the paths to reach folks. And as people grow capacity to think and feel into bigger things, because a lot of what happens in activism is a lot of fight, and for good reason. But if you don't know how to turn it off, you will fight people who are your comrades instead of ideas. So, okay. All right, let's do one over here.
So anger is the outward manifestation of enforcing boundaries, and Dr. Gabor Mate said that yesterday. And frameworks like nonviolent communication look at anger as putting blame on the other person and emphasize sort of a calmness and non-reactiveness, very similar to mindfulness and stoicism as well. So I'm just asking you, how do you balance that, this anger with and rightfully enforcing boundaries with that calmness approach?
There's a lot of things I like about nonviolent communication or compassionate communication. I teach it and use a lot of it. And I find a lot of times people who are attracted to it are conflict averse and actually have a hard time with boundaries and anger. And so I don't think the modality is it. I think it's the people who are attracted to it, then that's how it expresses. No human response is wrong. I'm going to say it again. No human response is wrong. Is it adaptive in the moment? So maybe you just have never been in that situation. Good for you. But sometimes enforcing, anger, a righteous anger will save your life. The problem is when it's too strong for the situation, it's lasting too long, and we get stuck in it. It's the stuckness, the rigidity that we forget that we are supposed to be fluid and adaptive. So I don't think it's that nonviolent communication is asking us to listen to one another, to express from our heart, and having worked with, I remember there's a organization for nonviolent parent education. And I remember one of their founders coming to work with me on somatic anger because they were having such a hard time and how it was manifesting for them. So we are humans, we are imperfect, and how we take ideas and how we express them, we may contort them and carry our traumas with them. It doesn't mean that the whole of the idea is wrong or bad. Take what we need, leave what doesn't match.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the choice. A lot of people are feeling, I see, restless, moving around. We have quite a bit more time here. We have till 4:15. I see questions or small group. So I'm going to kind of get a gestalt. So if people would like to do I have some small group prompts. If you'd like to do small groups now, can you please raise your hands high and down? And how many people want to keep doing questions?
But you did say 4 questions and I'm number 4.
Yeah,
Okay.
I gotcha. I gotcha. How many people want to still do questions? I will do some more at the end. Okay, I think what we'll do is we'll do this question, some small group, and then we'll wrap up with a little more questions. Okay, go.
I just want to breathe in you honoring the 4th promise to keep the thank you. How would you language a need for a pause from a person in position of power, for example, a judge, if you are a marginalized person, language impoverished on the stand, and the judge is non-trauma informed?
It's not me to say what to do. I mean, you do what you need to do. You probably say, shuck and jive and do, you might not be able to get that pause. Truthfully, it might not be possible.
Oh, but I'm asking, how would you ask for it? Not whether you're going to receive it, but how would you language that?
I think it's up to the person to decide if they feel safe enough asking for the pause.
If they feel safe. I'm asking, how would you language it?
Just, it really, how would I answer?
Yeah,
I
let's
could
role
only
play.
answer for myself. I could not coach somebody else. And if I was in that position, I
Yeah.
would say, I'm having a medical need and I need a pause.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, but I think it would be, to generalize your question is to encourage people to assess their degree of safety and then their ability to ask for what they need, because sometimes it is safer to not express the need. And we need to honor and not shame people for not speaking up when being quiet was the safest choice. Because a lot of times we hold up, you must always use your voice. What's wrong with you? You didn't use your voice. Sometimes using our voice gets us killed, gets us in trouble, gets us assaulted. And so we have to have a lot of compassion for the times we stay quiet. Right? So it's not, I don't want to always say that the speaking up is that we have compassion for the responses, and we are working towards a world where everybody's voice is welcome. So this isn't like the end point. This is where we're going. Yeah. Whether it's safe enough to be quiet, like even if I really need a pause, but it really is unsafe, I might have to swallow this one. But I can do it intentionally. The difference is I'm doing it intentionally so I can offer myself compassion. I think a lot of times we do it and we do it without offering ourselves compassion. That's the difference. You might not be able to resource. You might need to split. You might need to check out. There are a lot of things that happen. Like we say, dissociation is like bad. You know what? Dissociation saved my life. You? Yes. Okay. Right. Like I wouldn't be here if I didn't dissociate. So I don't want to say it's bad or wrong, but you know what? It was such a habit. I was doing it all the time. So that's the problem, not the dissociation. It's like the same thing. If we say anger is bad, anger can be useful, but if I use it all the time, probably not. Right. So it's the stuckness. Okay. So here's the prompts. Again, either if you're watching at home on live stream or in here, number one, how do you discern when your responses are adaptive for the current circumstance? What are the questions you ask yourself? How do you discern if your response is, this is useful now or not useful? Second, what do you do when you're in an over response? If you notice you're in an over response, what do you do? And lastly, how do you respond to yourself if you recognize that you're stress activated, but it's needed? You really did need it. So 3 questions. How do you discern when your responses are adaptive for the current circumstances? How do you discern? How do you know when your response is adaptive for the moment? It's working for you. What do you do if you're in an over response? What do you do when you realize I'm not in an over response? This is a good activation, right? So those are the 3 questions. Pick the ones that resonate with you. And I'm going to invite you to turn to the folks next to you in groups of 3 to 4. And let's do about 12 minutes, y'all. If there's still unsaid words or things you'd like to express, please, after the session at the next break, find your person and continue the conversation. I want to use our last little bit I know some folks were standing at the mic and had questions when I said only 4, so I want to take any more questions. I know you sat down and I'd love to hear what your question is.
I don't think it's on. Yeah, I just wanted to know if you're familiar with the NAP ministry and Trisha Hersey, Rest is Resistance, and what you think of her work.
Yes, I love her work a lot. And so this idea that for, folks who are not in the lap of luxury to stop and say, I'm going to take care of myself. It's an act of resistance to the narrative that I am only as good as what I can produce or what I consume, that I have value in and of myself, and that she actually uses the term rest not just as resistance, but as reparations. Rest as reparations. And I think it's really, really important how we, this is a cultural narrative about how we're valuable. And so if I'm resting, like I think my father, I'm a child of West African Nigerian immigrant, rest? What's rest? We don't rest, right? You work. And so could I have value outside of that? What is my humanity? So there's a lot of important questions that are raised by that. What comes up when we slow down, right? A lot of times we're staying busy to stay ahead of. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And if you all don't know, so the NAP ministry, if you're on social media, it's a fun ride there. Okay. We're going to do one here and then one here.
Hi, good evening. I'm Jennifer B. Thank you so much for being here and what you offer to the space. I had the wonderful opportunity to hear you and other panel speakers online a few weeks ago discuss the legacy of trauma. And I was just so taken by the way that you showed up in that space and what you had to share. Felt it was transcendent, interconnective, and really multidimensional as well as grounding, which everything that you're sort of sharing here is a mirror of that. And so that inspired me to search. But I take this pause because of what you just said. And I also want to say I wait patiently because I don't want to feed into that you need to produce anything. But have you, no, but, and have you, will you, where can I find your writings in a book?
Thank you. So it was my choice in 2017. I sat with myself. I really thank you very much. I'm going to say first off, gratefully received. I'm practicing my receiving. In 2017, I said, I'm going to write a book or I'm going to make a certification program. And I chose to make a certification program instead and poured, I don't know, 20 hours a week for I thought, oh, it's going to take me like a couple months. It was like 6 months. I was like, wow, y'all. And did that. And there's information about that at the back. And so, and I'm really glad actually I waited because we've built a community of practice of people practicing in 9 different countries, using the toolkit with all different kinds of populations. And we've learned a lot. We've refined, we've distilled, we've gotten sharper in a good way. And so I do have a chapter coming out in a book this summer in North Atlantic, Practicing Liberation. Highly recommend. Some incredible colleagues talking about trauma-informed application, Hala Khoury, Sarah King, some really incredible, Taj James, really incredible folks. And then I'll get to writing the little manifesto. It's coming. It's hard to say no. Yeah. The kind of breadth of work that's coming is so exciting when people are starting to understand how a trauma-informed embodied perspective what I hear so often is, this is the missing piece. This is the missing piece. People who are doing deep transformative work, but they forgot the body. And when they bring the body along and they bring the trauma-informed piece along, it's like, and so it's hard to say no. Last week I was in Ghana supporting a collaborative of international funders who want to do youth-led, deep participatory grant making, working with Ghanaian youth. I mean, like doing immersive story, puppetry, theater. They had all that, but they didn't have the trauma-informed and embodied. So I have to say no to some things like that to write. So it's coming. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, Ancam. Wonderful
you.
presentation. And I'm with Ergos Institute. My name is Sergio Ocampo. This question comes from our online audience that we can't leave them out. And they want to know from you, what is the difference between appeasement and fawning?
Great question. Thank you. Appeasement and fawning. So everybody, we have fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Yeah? because everyone loves alliteration. I really wish it wasn't like that, because fawning is actually a very small slice of the behavior that can happen across a power differential. It is actually the person who created it. When you read the original writings, they are talking about codependency and only codependency. Okay. Appeasement is a much broader category, of which fawning is a small slice, right? So in fawning, it's person to person. Appeasing, single person to single person, I'm fawning, right? As opposed to appeasing, it can be person to person, right? But it can be person to a lot of people. It can be a person to an idea or a cultural norm of how I'm supposed to be. And appeasement can be so strong and so constant that we actually don't even need a power figure anymore. We just do it automatically inside, and that's internalized oppression. So I really think it's important that we open up. It's like great fawn, but it's so teeny compared to what we can talk about with what happens with appeasement. So there's an article I wrote with my colleague Ray Johnson. It's on Medium. We did it a few years ago, and we chose to put it, well, that was before it was behind a paywall. I still think you can get it for free. We didn't want to put it in an academic journal we did a lot of research about, there's very little about fawn, very little. People just took the name and ran with it. There's almost no research whatsoever. And so I vote for using appeasement. I know it's not, it's like F, 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 A. It's not great. Okay, I don't want to, let's do one more.
Hi, really short.
There you go.
I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to an intake session, how we stay with a client in the shallow end when we're working with insurance and EOPs that require treatment plan and a diagnosis. They want to know the history, the developmental trauma, that whole thing.
Mhm. So, yes. One, we know it's not trauma informed. You haven't built trust with people, and suddenly you're asking them to divulge everything, right? I don't do trauma histories in that way anymore. I often will start by saying, I try to bring things current and say, we'd like to talk about how trauma is manifesting in your life now. What are the symptoms that are problematic? Which is a way to just frame it first, that we will get to the nitty gritty story, but right now, just how is it showing up, right? How is it impacting you? The impulse to tell the story doesn't just come from, the mandates that we need to fill out the forms. It comes from people who just have the vomiting, the trauma vomiting. I will pause people and I will pause them and I will say these words. Your story is so important. It deserves to be told, and it deserves and needs to be listened to, and I want to listen to it. And I see, as you're telling the story, you are in a lot of distress. Can we slow this down so that you are not harmed in telling the story? We will get there. So that kind of language often so I get enough to appease the system that requires I fill it out and give a diagnosis, right? But I am not doing harm in the meantime. And it's a real tough tightrope that y'all are walking in that system. And I will say, I have had the real fortune of working with, I worked with a city that was redesigning their youth development, youth intervention program. And this was one of how do we make intakes more trauma informed so that we don't lose people right out the bat, having to divulge all of this. And so this is a really, ways that you can do something in your seat, but also, you know what, if you work in a clinic, you work in a hospital, you work in a system, they revise their policies every now and then. Volunteer for the committee. Volunteer for the committee so that some of these things can get done in a more trauma-informed way. Take your knowledge and spread it to all your colleagues who are not here so that the policies are kinder. All right, with that, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I hope to see you tomorrow afternoon. We'll be doing some movement. We're going to do the therapeutic tremor that exists as a part of the resilience toolkit. Short half an hour. I think just after lunch. Come and clothes you can move in, and I'm going to hand it off.
Thank you so much, Inchem.